The year was 1943, and the air war over Germany had escalated into a campaign of annihilation. From bases in England, the Royal Air Force launched night raids with fleets of Avro Lancasters and Handley Page Halifaxes, their bomb bays laden with high-explosive ordnance, 4,000-pound cookies, and clusters of incendiaries designed to level entire districts. By day, the United States Army Air Forces took the skies with Boeing B-17 Flying Fortresses and consolidated B-24 Liberators, formations of hundreds droning eastward in tight boxes, braving German fighters and anti-aircraft fire to strike precision targets. The strategy was clear: destroy Germany's industrial backbone. Factories churning out ball bearings in Schweinfurt, synthetic oil plants in Luna, U-boat assembly yards in Hamburg. These were the arteries feeding the Wehrmacht's tanks, planes, and submarines. Allied planners, drawing on pre-war intelligence and reconnaissance photos, believed that sustained bombing would starve the enemy of resources, shortening the war by months. But the human cost was staggering. In Hamburg's Operation Gemara in July 1943, firestorms engulfed the city, killing over 40,000 civilians in nights of unrelenting horror. The air stank of burning flesh and phosphorus. Survivors emerged from cellars into streets where asphalt had melted underfoot. Yet, German defenses were failing. Flak batteries dotted the landscape, their 88mm guns barking skyward in futile barrages. But bombers flew higher, faster. Night fighters like the Messerschmitt Bf-110 prowled with radar, but losses mounted on both sides. On the ground, concrete bunkers and air raid shelters offered scant protection against direct hits. Standard reinforcements, thickened walls, steel beams, crumbled under the physics of blast waves, overpressure that could rupture eardrums at 200 meters, fragments traveling at supersonic speeds. Factories, vital to the war effort, were particularly vulnerable. A single bomb could ignite fuel stores or shatter machinery, halting production for weeks. In the Ruhr Valley, the industrial heartland, raids came almost nightly. Workers toiled under blackout conditions, the whine of sirens a constant companion. Political pressure from Berlin demanded unbreakable resilience. Goebbels' propaganda touted unshakable fortitude. But reality was rubble and rationed despair. Engineers scrambled to fortify, but shortages crippled efforts. Steel diverted to tanks, concrete mixed in from lack of cement, labor thinned by conscription and bombings. Normal defenses, roof trusses, sandbag barriers, proved inadequate against the escalating tonnage. Something had to give. As the bombs fell on a synthetic rubber plant in Hulse, one man watched the devastation and dared to think beyond orders. Dr. Friedrich Kessler was a man forged in the precision of pre-war Germany, his life a blueprint of calculation and restraint. Born in 1905 in Dresden, Kessler had studied civil engineering at the Technical University of Munich, graduating in 1928 with honors in structural dynamics. His early career involved designing bridges and factories, where he honed skills in load-bearing analysis and material stress. By 1939, the war had conscripted his talents. Assigned to the organization Todt, the Reich's massive construction arm, he oversaw fortifications in occupied France before transfer to the home front. Kessler was no ideologue, his motivations rooted in survival, not fervor. Tall and gaunt, with wire-rimmed glasses perpetually smudged from blueprints, he spoke in measured tones, hiding a quiet disdain for bureaucratic inefficiency. Posted to the IG Farben synthetic rubber plant in Hulse, near Recklinghausen, in late 1942, he found a facility on the brink. The plant, sprawling across 200 acres, produced Buna rubber essential for tires and seals in vehicles and aircraft. Raids had already scarred it, craters pocked the grounds, workshops gutted by fire. His superiors demanded adherence to standard designs. Reichsminister Albert Speer's edicts for minimal material use, reinforced concrete slabs no thicker than regulations allowed. But Kessler saw the flaws. These structures transmitted blasts directly, amplifying damage through rigid frames. Vibration shattered pipes, overpressure buckled doors. Workers whispered of despair, their shifts interrupted by dives into slit trenches. Kessler's team, a mix of forced laborers and weary Germans, toiled under his watchful eye, But he felt the weight. Failure meant not just lost production, but accusations of sabotage from the Gestapo, who lurked like shadows. At night, in his sparse quarters amid the hum of machinery, Kessler grappled with doubt. He hated the endless orders from Berlin, quotas that ignored reality. Standard designs were useless against the Allied onslaught, bombs that penetrated roofs, detonating inside to maximize ruin. He sketched alternatives in secret, his pencil scratching against ration paper, aware that deviation could end in a noose. Yet, the plant's survival was his own. A direct hit could bury him in rubble. As 1943 wore on, raids intensified. Kessler stood amid the debris of a fresh strike, dust coating his coat, the acrid smell of burned rubber choking the air. Something forbidden stirred in his mind, a modification that could save everything if it didn't kill him first. The physics of aerial bombing was a merciless science, one that Kessler understood intimately from dissected raid reports and shattered test models. Allied bombs varied. The RAF's 500-pound general-purpose explosives, packed with amytal, created blast waves traveling at 1,600 meters per second, compressing air into a hammer that could flatten walls. Overpressure, measured in pounds per square inch, peaked at 20 psi near the epicenter, enough to collapse lungs or hurl bodies like ragdolls. Incendiaries followed, magnesium flares igniting fires that consumed oxygen and structures alike. Penetration was the killer for industrial targets. Bombs like the USAAF's 1,000-pound semi-armor-piercing rounds burrowed through roofs before detonating, sending shockwaves through foundations. In reinforced concrete, common in German factories, rigidity was the enemy. Blasts propagated without dissipation, cracking beams and shearing bolts. Kessler had seen it, pipes bursting from transmitted vibrations, machinery toppled by harmonic resonances that amplified the initial impact. Why did standard designs fail? Regulations mandated uniform slabs, 1.5 meters thick for roofs, with steel rebar grids at prescribed intervals. But shortages meant thinner mixes, weaker aggregates. Labor constraints rushed pores, leaving voids that weakened integrity. Blast dispersion was ignored. Walls channeled overpressure inward, turning buildings into pressure cookers. Decoying, false structures to draw bombs, was discouraged as wasteful. Kessler's inspections revealed the toll. After a June 1943 raid, the Hulse plant lost 60% capacity, rubber vats ruptured, workers buried under collapsed ceilings. The air raids themselves were sensory assaults. Sirens pierced the night, workers scrambling as searchlights swept the sky. The drone of engines grew to a thunder, then the whistle of falling bombs, a sound like tearing fabric. Impacts shook the earth, dust cascading from rafters, the boom echoing in chests. Fires crackled, smoke billowing thick and black, carrying the scent of charred insulation and molten metal. Kessler, huddled in a shelter, felt the ground heave, knowing each strike exposed the doctrine's flaws. Berlin's pressure mounted, produce more, fortify less. Kessler's reports on needed reinforcements were dismissed, materials reserved for U-boat pens or Atlantic Wall. He stared at the blueprints, the problem crystallizing. To survive, he must break the rules. In the dim light of his office, surrounded by stacks of requisition forms yellowed from age, Kessler sketched the forbidden concept. It was simple in theory, lethal in execution, introduced sacrificial voids and decoupling layers into the factory's key structures. Standard doctrine called for solid, monolithic pores, concrete and steel fused rigidly to maximize strength. But Kessler envisioned hollow sections filled with sand and gravel, acting as shock absorbers. These voids would collapse under blast, dissipating energy before it reached critical machinery. Decoupled walls, separated by rubber scraps scavenged from production, would vibrate independently, preventing resonance. Why illegal? Reich regulations strictly controlled material use. Sand and gravel quotas were for road repairs, not experimental fills. Redirecting them meant falsifying logs, a sabotage offense punishable by death. Structural modifications required Berlin approval, a process mired in bureaucracy. Kessler's design violated Speer's efficiency directives. No wasteful layers, only minimal reinforcements. Adding hidden sacrificial beams, Steel pilfered from scrapped equipment, broke allocation laws, as every ton was accounted for frontline needs. Risk haunted him. Discovery by inspectors could lead to Gestapo interrogation, torture in damp cells, accusations of undermining the war effort. Kessler's internal doubt gnawed. Was this genius or folly? He paced his quarters, the distant thump of anti-aircraft guns mirroring his heartbeat. Fear of execution loomed. Colleagues had vanished for less. Moral conflict tore at him. Saving the plant meant aiding the regime he quietly despised, yet failure doomed workers he knew by name. The idea solidified during a midnight raid, as bombs whistled overhead. It must work, he muttered to himself, crumpling a rejected report. But implementation would demand secrecy, lies, and nerves of steel. Under cover of blackout, Kessler initiated the clandestine work. The Hulse plant's main hall, housing Buna polymerization vats, was the target, a cavernous space vulnerable to roof collapse. He assembled a trusted crew, 5 Polish forced laborers, bribed with extra rations, and 2 German foremen sworn to silence. Construction began in shifts, interrupted by raids that sent them scrambling. First, the voids. Workers excavated shallow trenches beneath foundations, lining them with salvaged timber forms. Sand, redirected from a nearby quarry under falsified transport orders, was poured in tons, loose, uncompacted to absorb compression. Kessler supervised, his flashlight beam dancing over sweating faces, the air thick with dust that clung to skin like ash. "Pack it loosely," he whispered, aware that one loose tongue could end it all. Decoupling followed, rubber sheeting, scraps from defective production runs, inserted between wall sections. Illegal, rubber quotas were sacred, reserved for tires. Kessler falsified inventory, logging them as destroyed in raid. Steel beams, pilfered from a demolished outbuilding, were welded into hidden frames. Arc flashes hidden behind tarps, the metallic tang sharp in the night air. Interruptions were constant. Sirens wailed. Workers dove into trenches as Lancasters thundered overhead. Bombs cratered nearby fields, vibrations testing the unfinished work. One night, a stray incendiary ignited a storage shed. Flames crackled orange, smoke billowing as Kessler directed fire crews, heart pounding at the risk of exposure. Bribes flowed, cigarettes to guards, promises to laborers. Lies layered like the modifications, reports to Berlin claimed. Routine repairs, photos staged to show compliance. Kessler's fear peaked during an inspection. A tote official arrived unannounced, clipboard in hand. "Show me the reinforcements," he demanded. Kessler guided him past the hidden voids, sweat beading under his collar. A false step, a probing question, disaster. "All per regulations," he lied, voice even. The man left satisfied, but Kessler collapsed afterward, hands trembling. Doubt assailed. Would the layers hold? Or crumble, dooming them all? By September 1943, the work neared completion, voids filled, walls decoupled, sacrificial structures buried like secrets. The plant hummed on, unaware of its guardian angel's peril. October 14, 1943, the night sky over Hulse darkened early, clouds heavy with the promise of storm. Sirens pierced the dusk at 1900 hours, workers streaming to shelters as the drone of engines grew. RAF Bomber Command had targeted the Ruhr again, 200 Lancasters and Halifaxes, Pathfinders dropping flares that lit the landscape like false dawn. Kessler, in the control room, felt the familiar knot in his gut. The first bombs fell at 1930, whistles slicing the air. Impacts thundered, earth heaving, dust sifting from ceilings. A 4,000-pounder struck the perimeter, cratering the road in a geyser of soil. Overpressure rattled windows, but inside the hall, the modification stirred. Shockwaves hit the decoupled walls, rubber layers flexing like sinew, dissipating force. Direct hits followed. A 500-pounder penetrated the roof, detonating amid the voids. Sand compressed with a muffled roar, absorbing the blast, energy funneled into collapse rather than transmission. The hall shuddered, beams groaning, but vats held steady. Fires sparked from incendiaries, crackling across the floor, smoke choking the air like fog. Workers emerged post all clear, extinguishing flames with sand buckets, the scent of scorched rubber pervasive. Wave after wave, bombs hammered the structure, overpressure bursting eardrums of those exposed. Kessler crouched, feeling vibrations through the floor, milder than before, the layers working. A near miss sent fragments pinging off walls, but no breach. Chaos reigned, shouts amid the din, fires hissing under water hoses, the night illuminated by burning flares. As dawn broke, silence fell. The raid had dropped over 1,000 tons, yet the plant stood, scarred, smoking, but intact. Smoke lingered over hulls as daylight revealed the miracle. The main hall's roof sagged in places, craters dotted the grounds, but machinery hummed, vats operational, production lines resuming with minimal delay. Allied reconnaissance photos, snapped by mosquitoes days later, showed superficial damage. Bomb damage assessments in London puzzled analysts. Hulls resilient, recommend restrike. Reports noted, unaware of the hidden hand. German command was baffled. Local officials toured the site, expecting ruin. How? A Wehrmacht colonel demanded, kicking at settled sand from a collapsed void. Kessler stood silent, attributing it to fortuitous design. Whispers spread, the plant had survived where others fell. Production quotas met, rubber flowing to the front. But confusion brewed in Berlin. Intelligence suspected sabotage. Why else minimal damage? Kessler's modifications remained secret, their effectiveness a quiet victory amid the rubble. In the raid's aftermath, investigation descended like a storm. Gestapo agents arrived November 1943, black coats stark against the gray factory. Kessler was summoned to a makeshift office, the air heavy with cigarette smoke and menace. Explain the survival. The interrogator snarled, files slapping the table. Kessler's heart raced. Evidence of pilfered materials could seal his fate. He lied smoothly. Standard reinforcements held. But audits revealed discrepancies, missing sand, unexplained rubber use. Threat of arrest loomed. Kessler envisioned the camps, execution squads. A superior, sensing value, intervened quietly, protecting the engineer to maintain output. Silence it. Orders came. No punishment, but a transfer loomed. Kessler reassigned to a lesser post, his work unacknowledged. The modification faded into obscurity, never replicated amid escalating raids. Its legacy echoed quietly through history. This obscure episode pierces the myths of World War II bombing. Allied campaigns, while devastating, faced human ingenuity that blunted their edge. Kessler's layers revealed vulnerabilities in rigid designs, yet wartime constraints, shortages, bureaucracy, prevented mass adoption. Such modifications remained isolated, lost in the war's vast machinery. Ingenuity versus industrial might. One man's risk highlighted the human factor, where desperation birthed solutions silenced by fear. Post-war, Allied engineers studied surviving structures, but Kessler's story vanished, rediscovered in obscure reports, a testament to survival's fragile thread.